Ya tengo configurado mi audio en video, lo tengo en 1080, 30 FPS, lo tengo así tal cual, los atajos, todo lo tengo ya configurado. Pero vamos al tema de que mi transmisión principal va a ser desde Twitch. Aceptar. Perfecto. Ya que estamos desde Twitch, el paso siguiente
Buenas
es
tardes para
configurar
todos y
ahora
para
sí las
todas
salidas
y muchas
múltiples
gracias
de
por
OBS
acompañarnos
Studio con
en
este plugin.
esta
Vámonos primero
tarde
a
de
nuestra cuenta de
domingo en
Facebook.
nuestra
Aquí yo tengo ya mi
primera
página de
actividad
Facebook
del
creada,
cuarto
entonces lo que
Festival
hago
de
es darle clic
Navegación
en
Tradicional del
directo. Si no
Caribe,
sabes crear una transmisión en
insular.
Facebook, aquí lo vas a aprender a hacer.
Este
Luego
es
le damos
un
en la opción de
proyecto
transmitir, le damos seleccionar. Ahora, lo que
liderado
vamos a hacer
por
es lo siguiente, aquí nos
Cleveland
pide
and
cámara
Culture
web,
All Progress
recuerden colocar,
Initiative
seleccionar
y que
software de
cuenta con el
transmisión, le
apoyo
damos
de
clic y
varios
aquí nos arroja la
aliados
clave de streaming,
a los
pero
cuales voy a
tenemos que
empezar
colocar el servidor
agradeciendo por
RTMP que nos
el
arroja Facebook
apoyo
y
que
aquí
nos
está. Le
han
damos en
brindado
configuración
en esta
avanzada,
cuarta
si no te
edición.
aparece, aquí está el clic y aquí está
En
el
primer lugar, el
URL del
Programa
servidor, le
Nacional de
damos
Concertación
copiar,
Cultural del
nos
Ministerio de
vamos a
Cultura,
OBS Studio, nos
que nos ha
vamos
venido apoyando
a la
desde el
parte izquierda
inicio,
donde
desde
está
hace
nuestro
4
plugin y
años
le
que
damos
empezamos con esta
modificar.
iniciativa que
En
busca
servidor
visibilizar la cultura
RTMP es el
marítima
que acabamos de
del pueblo
copiar y lo
raizal
pegamos. Le
de San
damos
Andrés,
OK.
Providencia y
Sí, vamos a
Santa
hacerlo paso a
Catalina,
paso. Luego
pero que
nos
también busca
devolvemos a
establecer
nuestra
diálogos
transmisión
y
de servidor de Facebook
aproximarnos a otras
y vamos a darle clic en
experiencias
copiar
culturales de
la
otros
clave
lugares
de
de la región
transmisión.
y del
Copiar.
mundo
Aquí ya
relacionados con
aparece el
la
check. Vamos
navegación.
nuevamente a
En
OBS
segundo lugar, la
Studio.
Universidad Nacional de
Clic
Colombia,
en el panel de
sede
salida
Caribe,
múltiple en
en la isla
modificar de
de San
Facebook
Andrés.
y clave
Y
RTMP le
a las
damos
siguientes
pegar.
organizaciones
Las
que nos han
otras
apoyado
configuraciones
en
yo
esta
siempre las dejo
oportunidad:
tal
The
cual como
Lighthouse
están. Ajustes
Foundation
de video,
de
codificador,
Alemania,
obtener de
el
OBS,
Fondo
todo obtener de
Acción
OBS, ya que si le
de
cambio las
Colombia, Censar
codificaciones puede que
Aguaviva
consuma más
también de
recursos de tu PC
Colombia,
y si tu PC no
el
tiene unos
Centro de
recursos muy
Excelencia en
grandes,
Ciencias
pues
del
te
Mar,
puede generar lag. Yo siempre
CEMALIN,
lo dejo así,
la
solamente
Comisión
coloco
Colombiana del
el servidor.
Océano, el Centro Cultural del Banco de la República en San Andrés Isla, la Radio Nacional de Colombia, la Casa Editorial Welcome, la iniciativa Grand Sea Flower, Slow Food International y el Cayman Catboat Club.
Habla,
Dime. Ya se está desconectando la gente.
No, ¿cómo se van a desconectar?
Se están desconectando. Había 4 y ahora no hay ninguno. Hay 7 y ahora hay 6.
Espera, ¿por qué? A ver. A ver, hola.
Hola. Ay, se está desconectando la gente.
No, ¿cómo se van a desconectar?
¿Empiezo otra vez desde cero?
Sí, por favor, vamos.
Ok. ¿Ya?
Sí.
Buenas tardes para todos y para todas. Nuevamente pedimos disculpas por los problemas técnicos. Ahora sí vamos a iniciar con esta primera actividad del cuarto festival, primera actividad virtual del cuarto festival de navegación tradicional del Caribe insular. Una iniciativa de Sealand and Culture All Providence Initiative, una organización local del archipiélago de San Andrés, Providencia y Santa Catalina, que cuenta con el apoyo de diversos actores locales, regionales, nacionales e internacionales que hacen esta iniciativa posible. Entre ellos me gustaría mencionar al Programa Nacional de Concertación Cultural del Ministerio de Cultura, que nos ha venido apoyando desde hace 4 años cuando empezamos con esta apuesta por visibilizar o contribuir a visibilizar la cultura marítima del pueblo raizal. A la Universidad Nacional de Colombia, sede Caribe, en la isla de San Andrés. The Lighthouse Foundation, organización alemana que nos ha apoyado en esta ocasión. El Fondo Acción, Censar Agua Viva, el Centro de Excelencia en Ciencias del Mar Semarín, la Comisión Colombiana del Océano, el Centro Cultural del Banco de la República en San Andrés Isla, la Radio Nacional de Colombia, la Casa Editorial Welcome, la iniciativa Grancy Flower, Slow Food International y el Cayman Catboat Club. Estas organizaciones hacen posible estas actividades que hemos venido haciendo este año, que en esta edición son tanto presenciales en San Andrés y Providencia y Santa Catalina, como virtuales, como esta actividad que vamos a iniciar en el día de hoy. So thank you everybody if you connect and see we in this occasion. As we do every year, the idea is that we have a space where we can talk in a different language, where we also visibilize Creole, which is the language from the racial people in San Andres, Province, and Catalina. And also we are always having people that coming from other places and share with we in different languages. Para la tarde de hoy, en nuestra primera actividad, les tenemos unos invitados o una invitada muy especial que viene a compartir con nosotros literalmente desde el otro lado del mundo, aunque en estos momentos ella no está allí, pero desde la República Federal de Micronesia, Federal Republic of Micronesia, un estado localizado en el Pacífico Sur, ¿cierto? En literalmente el otro lado del mundo, un archipiélago, ¿cierto? También como nosotros, con, bueno, bastantes más islas que nosotros, una región que conocemos muy poco, pero en donde precisamente este tema de la navegación tradicional ha sido supremamente importante. Los isleños de esta región, tanto de Micronesia como de otras de las pequeñas naciones insulares que se localizan en esta zona, han sido o son reconocidos por precisamente sus conocimientos y sus prácticas tradicionales de navegación que fueron desarrolladas durante miles de años, ¿cierto?, de convivencia con estos lugares, ¿cierto?, que entre otras cosas pues son islas coralinas, islas volcánicas con arrecifes de coral, que en ese sentido pues se parecen mucho a San Andrés y Providencia, desde donde estamos transmitiendo el día de hoy. Y en esta ocasión entonces los hemos invitado para compartir el día de hoy sobre unas manifestaciones culturales que han sido reconocidas por la UNESCO como Patrimonio Cultural de la Humanidad. Y se trata de lo que se conoce como el Carolinian Wayfinding and Canoe Making, que es básicamente, son dos manifestaciones culturales. Una tiene que ver con los sistemas de localización astronómica desarrollados por las comunidades de esta zona del mundo que tienen sus propios sistemas de ubicación en el cielo, ¿cierto? Sus sistemas astronómicos no son los mismos que manejamos nosotros y fueron desarrollados hace cientos de años. Y esto pues les ha permitido, y seguramente esto es lo que nos van a contar el día de hoy, pues les permitió, de hecho, manejar, digamos, este entorno insular y moverse por él de manera efectiva. Y la otra manifestación complementaria que tiene que ver con la construcción de canoas, de unas canoas bastante especiales, como vamos a ver a continuación. Entonces, para no alargar más esta presentación, los voy a dejar con Ashley Meredith. Ella es antropóloga, trabaja para la República Federal de Micronesia, y ella nos va a estar compartiendo sobre estas manifestaciones culturales. Para que lo sepan, ella va a hacer su presentación en inglés. Tiene una presentación con muchas fotografías, de manera que ustedes también puedan ir viendo las imágenes sobre lo que ella va hablando. Vamos a tener también unos videos que también están en inglés. Sin embargo, a lo largo de la presentación, como ya lo hemos hecho en otros momentos, yo haré unos pequeños resúmenes, ¿cierto? No una traducción directa, ¿cierto? Exacta, sino más bien un resumen para que tampoco sea tan pesado el ejercicio. Así que con esto los dejo, y al final de la presentación de Ashley tendremos un espacio para preguntas. Entonces, quienes nos están viendo en Facebook o en YouTube Live, en el chat, pueden compartirlas, y al final de la presentación podemos hacérselas a nuestra invitada. Thank you, Ashley, for being here today with us. It's really a pleasure to hear and learn about this Carolinian wayfinding and canoe making. I am very, very happy to have you here. It was very hard. It's very emotionating to have somebody from the other side of the world sharing with us. So thank you, and it's your turn.
All right. Thank you very much for your nice introduction. Buenas tardes to our audience, and good afternoon to our host, and good morning to the FSM. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to share about the FSM's recent nomination of the ICH element, Carolinian wayfinding and canoe making. Before continuing with our presentation, I wish to take a moment to pay our respects to FSM's traditional, municipal, state, and national leadership. On behalf of our office, the FSM Office of National Archives, Culture, and Historic Preservation, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work, dedication, and support given to nominating this precious element. Without these support systems, this nomination that was more than 5 years in the making would not have been possible. Unfortunately, our navigator was unable to present today. Therefore, our topic today will focus on safeguarding the ICH element and the nomination of the element Carolinian wayfinding and canoe making. There are a couple of videos that will elaborate more about the element itself, but I'm not in a position to speak about how to navigate or how to make a canoe, as those are not roles that I usually carry out. So without further ado, I will move on to our first slide. Okay, so in this presentation, as I mentioned in the opening, I will be talking about the element, the nomination process, the significance of the nomination, and the results of this nomination. Obviously, one of the results is that it's been nominated, but I'll speak more to the tangible outcomes of having this element nominated. Ana, did you want to?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Bueno, nos dice, para empezar, Ashley nos dice que empieza presentando sus respetos para un navegante que ha sido fundamental para el proceso de reconocimiento y salvaguarda de las tradiciones de navegación de la República de Micronesia. Él estaba, de hecho, invitado para participar en este espacio y contarnos, compartir con nosotros. Sin embargo, por cuestiones de salud, pues no fue posible. Sin embargo, pues ella quiere hacer este reconocimiento porque ha sido una personaje clave y además porque ella no es pues una navegante ni una fabricante de canoas, una constructora naval, y pues obviamente lo que va a presentar es más desde pues el proceso que ella ha acompañado con el estado de Micronesia. Y para empezar, entonces, pues nos va a contar un poco sobre este proceso de nominación y bueno, sobre las manifestaciones.
Okay. All right. So, well, the ICH element, what is ICH? ICH is an acronym for intangible cultural heritage, and it's that cultural heritage that usually involves the creative minds and the manifestation maybe of the physical nature. So in the case of wayfinding or navigation, canoe making, the creative genius that goes into that, the manifestations are to be able to go somewhere or to create a canoe, to be seaworthy, to design it. And so the intangible part is that stuff that we can't touch per se, but we may see the manifestations of it. Maybe something more relatable can be like knowledge of wind. You can know where it's going. You can't necessarily capture it or touch it, but you can feel it and you can see the effects of it. So that intangible cultural heritages are those pieces in the mind that you can't quite touch. Naming the element was a very important part because wayfinding takes place throughout Micronesia, and so the name of it can't just be navigation. It can't just be wayfinding. It needs to be culturally appropriate in the naming, and so Carolinian wayfinding was the term that was developed by our communities, and even more specifically, there's a local name for it, although I'm unable to pronounce it correctly, so I won't try. But anyway, this element, the naming process, it wasn't really that we had to find a name as much as it was just making sure it was correctly represented. And so it involved a good bit of discussion to find out how to call it, how to represent it. This discussion, of course, took place with the navigators involved, and just making sure that we understood each other, communicating, and making sure that that we had captured what was intended. So this ICH element, UNESCO's role in identifying this element, it had been a long time coming. It actually had really began in YAP with the former HPO, and he was really involved in getting it started, at least from a documentation perspective. There had always been the Traditional Navigation Society on YAP proper that had involved a number of people who could carry out the element or teach the element or had knowledge of the element. And then another organization, WAGE, which focused a lot more on canoe making. It involved youth from the outer islands. It taught them how to make a canoe, and so it was much more hands-on. In that respect, it was a centerpiece actually in the downtown part of Colonia near the Living History Museum. And so UNESCO has just been very supportive of this element, of documenting this element, guiding us to prepare the nomination. And so they've taken just a very active role, which we're very appreciative of in having those conversations. So go ahead, Anna. I'll switch.
Ok, básicamente empieza contándonos Ashley sobre lo que significa, digamos, el patrimonio cultural inmaterial, ¿cierto? Lo que es una manifestación que pertenece al ámbito de lo inmaterial y de los procesos, digamos, el proceso de nominación para el reconocimiento de estas manifestaciones culturales, el Carolinian Wayfinding y el Canoe making, o sea, la construcción de canoas y los sistemas de posicionamiento en el mar a través de las estrellas, que son precisamente dimensiones simbólicas, ¿cierto? Que incluyen obviamente también una parte material que hacen parte de lo que es el patrimonio cultural inmaterial. Digamos que el tema del patrimonio cultural inmaterial es algo que se ha vuelto muy importante en las últimas décadas, ¿cierto? De hecho, en la lista mundial de patrimonio cultural inmaterial hay varias manifestaciones culturales de diferentes poblaciones, por ejemplo, en Colombia, y pues esto es algo que se hace, digamos, con apoyo de los estados, ¿cierto? De los países, obviamente de la UNESCO, que es, digamos, quien lidera una parte de estos procesos y como ella dice, pues ha apoyado lo que se ha hecho en Micronesia, pero por supuesto también con la comunidad y sobre todo con las personas que portan estos conocimientos, que son precisamente las que de alguna manera tienen que llegar a acuerdos sobre cómo salvaguardar estas manifestaciones. You can go ahead.
Now it's time to show the first video.
Okay.
This will be more, yeah, this video will be about the element itself, so some of the ins and outs of it, but more of an overview rather than like, don't take this as education.
Ok, entonces ahora vamos a ver un video que nos va a presentar entonces una parte de lo que ella nos está contando.
Okay, no worries.
En vivo.
Buenas tardes nuevamente. Qué pena, hemos tenido un problema técnico y no estamos pudiendo transmitir el video. Entonces vamos a continuar con la presentación de Ashley Meredith sobre el Carolinian Wayfinding y Canoe making. Adelante, go ahead, Ashley, continue, please.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about the nomination application a bit more in depth. One of the key aspects to this nomination application, and it is emphasized by UNESCO increasingly so. In FSM, the nomination wouldn't be possible anyway if we didn't do the community components. So we spent a significant amount of time working with the communities. In fact, it originated with the communities, and as I mentioned before, the organizations of WAGE and TNS, and then a former navigator, Papa Mao. They had all been very active in teaching some aspect of this element, sharing it, passing it down to the appropriate people. And so it does have a lot of community origination and as well as support. There's been a lot of data collected previously about this element. It's important to note that because a nomination needs to be informed, and this kind of data has been collected for at least 100 years by various scholars and community members. We have to remember that with documentation in science, it's not just it doesn't just start with a researcher coming to the islands to do it. It also needs to be considered that research began with those navigators and those canoe makers who are teaching it to the next person who is worthy of the information, and in that way, it would probably be considered the earlier form of science, because it's not enough to just have the information and tell it to someone. It needs to be learned, and the way that it is shared matters. And so in this way, we need to consider that this previously collected data goes far beyond the first outside researchers. And then another aspect to the nomination is the significance of the element. Significance to the community, significance to the way of life, significance to the culture. All of the significance possible needs to be considered in the application as you're writing. And so all of this, it gets written into a very long application. We say application because there is a document that has specific questions to answer, but they're more than just questions. They're not yes and no. They're descriptive responses to really justify the significance of the element, that it is desired for safeguarding by the community. And so these three components to the application are extremely important. Go ahead, Ana.
Okay. So, básicamente, bueno, aquí nos está mostrando, Ashley, para empezar, me parece importante este mapa donde podemos ver dónde se localiza los estados federados de Micronesia, precisamente en Oceanía, ¿cierto? Hacia el norte de Australia. Y nos está contando entonces cómo el proceso de nominación de estas manifestaciones para ser reconocidas como patrimonio cultural inmaterial de la humanidad tiene una base, un origen en las mismas comunidades portadoras de este conocimiento, ¿cierto? De hecho, pues digamos, para la UNESCO, que es quien hace como el reconocimiento final, pues es clave que este proceso venga, digamos, o tenga un interés por parte de quienes portan el conocimiento y que sea apoyado por ellos, ¿cierto? No puede ser como un proceso que se hace desde afuera. En ese sentido, pues es importante mencionar que había, desde antes de que se hiciera la nominación, pues había tanto sabedores como organizaciones que venían de alguna manera trabajando por la salvaguarda, digamos, de estas manifestaciones y que de alguna manera pues son claves para este proceso, entre otras cosas porque había de alguna manera pues unos procesos de recolección previa de la información, ¿cierto? Que estaba de hecho pues en los mismos sabedores que lo habían seguido transmitiendo, ¿cierto? Algunas nuevas generaciones, y pues aquí es importante señalar la importancia de estos procesos de transmisión de conocimiento que son claves para que estas manifestaciones pues sigan teniendo sentido en la actualidad. Go ahead.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this community origin and support aspect to the nomination. As I mentioned before, it was already there prior to the nomination or the document because it's so much a part of the community. When we talk about community origin and support, we're talking about community, memory, and awareness of UNESCO. It's very important that the communities understand what it means to be an ICH element or to be on a UNESCO list. While it's prestigious, it also comes with responsibilities in terms of reporting. It also comes with some ramifications as well. It becomes more widely known, and sometimes with this kind of knowledge, it's a sacred knowledge, or it's a kind of knowledge that isn't necessarily prepared or ready for the whole world. And so to make the decision to nominate an element, it very much has to be the community's decision. And so in this case, while navigation historically hasn't been taught to just anyone or everyone, certain people are identified and educated about navigation or canoe making. In this situation, the choice was to safeguard by making more people aware of the practice and the knowledge. So that's one part. We also had to demonstrate this with letters of support from the community and practitioners of the element. And so this was a great national effort to provide these letters of support and to get them in a timely manner. And then there were also some letters of support from all levels of the government. So the national government, for example, which came from our office, and then the state historic preservation offices supported the element as well, and NGOs. It was important that even though they may not necessarily be a level of the government, they work with the government often, and so having their support was critical to the nomination as well. It doesn't make sense to nominate an element that may be contested and may further create issues. And so part of community origin and support is to demonstrate that it is not a contested element and that it is something that is desired to be more well known, widely known. Go ahead, Ana.
Ok, básicamente nos habla sobre la complejidad de este proceso, ¿cierto? Y lo que significa el apoyo y el interés de las comunidades porque esto sea reconocido a un nivel, digamos, mundial, ¿cierto? Porque un reconocimiento de estos, digamos, pues tiene, digamos, implica ciertas cosas, sobre todo con conocimientos que muchas veces pueden ser, pues pueden tener una dimensión simbólica, una dimensión sagrada, ¿cierto? Que no siempre son conocimientos y prácticas que estén abiertos a todo el mundo. Y pues ahí, digamos, hay una gran complejidad en cómo tomar, digamos, la decisión de llevar a cabo un proceso como este, que precisamente significa hacer visible al mundo lo que la gente sabe, lo que la gente hace, ¿cierto? Y pues eso, digamos, si bien tiene una dimensión que puede ser muy valiosa, pues también tiene sus problemas. Entonces, digamos, lo que ocurre en el caso, digamos, de Micronesia, que implicó de alguna manera una apuesta, digamos, desde el Estado mismo, desde las comunidades, fue decidir que a pesar, digamos, de que había conocimientos que de pronto tenían este nivel, digamos, de lo secreto, de lo sagrado, ¿cierto? Pues que igual era más importante conservarlos, salvaguardarlos, buscar formas para protegerlos, y en ese sentido, digamos, hubo un acuerdo entre los diferentes actores involucrados para poder llevar a cabo la manifestación. Porque como ella misma dice, no tiene sentido, obviamente, nominar una tradición, una manifestación cultural, cuando no hay un acuerdo al interior de las comunidades sobre si realmente, digamos, se quiere dar ese paso. Bueno. Buenas tardes nuevamente para todos y para todas, y disculpas porque realmente tuvimos un problema técnico por internet, no sabemos qué pasó y bueno, en estos momentos solo estamos transmitiendo por YouTube porque la transmisión de Facebook Live no está funcionando. Sin embargo, la buena noticia es que vamos a poder transmitir el video que tuvimos problemas hace un momento. Entonces, antes de volver con Ashley, y que nos siga contando de este proceso de nominación de las manifestaciones como patrimonio cultural inmaterial de la humanidad. Vamos a ver el video sobre estas tradiciones que seguramente nos va a aclarar muchas cosas al respecto. Carlos, por favor, el video.
Years. One such form of wisdom that was no doubt necessary in ancient times was the suite of abilities required to sail across vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean on single-hulled outrigger voyaging canoes. The knowledge of what to do while on the open ocean was also complemented by the detailed mental blueprints and the carving skills needed to build the handcrafted canoes that carried people and provisions safely from one island to the next when needed. In today's world, it is a wonder that such knowledge still exists, given the availability of new technologies such as GPS and older ones such as outboard engines and fiberglass boats. Despite these modern conveniences, though, the traditional knowledge surrounding navigation and canoe building does endure. It survives in an unbroken chain of cultural transmission between masters and apprentices that has taken place for centuries throughout the hundreds of islands of the Federated States of Micronesia. Today, it is mainly on the more remote islands of Micronesia that these precious forms of intangible cultural heritage still survive, especially on the outer islands of the states of Chuuk and Yap. This is because the process of passing customs and culture onto newer generations faced less obstacles from external pressures. It is also because on these isolated small islands, traditional navigation and canoe building remains the only option for oceanic transportation, where regular ship service, reliable fuel sources, and other options are not present. Among the Pulu of Micronesia, wayfinding is a remarkable skill that draws on a fund of information held in the minds of the navigators. The stars, the ocean, the sea life, the clouds, the winds, the currents, and the waves are each variables of which Pulu must master an understanding. It is understood that if you do not learn everything there is to know, then you will be risking not only your own life on the journeys, but also those of your fellow crew. Part of the training on learning how to navigate is to memorize all the stars in the night sky and the locations where they rise and fall on the eastern and western horizons. Navigators must also know the location of all the islands in the region in relation to the stars that rise above each, so that they can line up their headings according to the routes from one waypoint to another, all of which they also memorize. Since it is rare that a voyage will take a straight course at all times, this skill takes much more than knowing which stars to orient their canoe under. Currents, bad weather, and all sorts of other variables make it necessary to constantly determine the canoe's changing position in relation to its route and to recalculate the heading. And so along with the stars, Pulu need to learn a whole host of other types of knowledge in order to ensure that they stay on course. They are taught, therefore, how to read the waves, currents, sun, wind, and clouds in the daylight or whenever the stars are not visible. Lessons, experience, and practice therefore all combine to give the master navigators an incredibly perceptive ability to feel their way along their paths when needed. Given the enormous amount of information that must be processed at all times, it is truly remarkable how accurate non-instrument Carolinian navigation can be. Before the introduction of boats and outboard motors to the islands, various different types of canoes were commonly found throughout Micronesia. On Yap's main island group, for example, there was a canoe named a thowab that was flatter and mainly used for transporting people and things throughout the calm canals and near-shore waters. This canoe was propelled by paddling or with long bamboo poles to push it through the shallows. Then there was also the chugpin, a more ornate and decorative canoe that could be sailed or paddled and was known for its white swan neck carvings on the tips of both ends from which dangled a string of shells. There was also the gawl, a special paddling and sailing canoe that had at both tips a carved crescent-shaped feature with a bird in the middle that rotates to one of two positions, an open-facing position perpendicular to the canoe, which indicated it was at war, and a closed position in line with the canoe, which communicated it was on a peaceful mission. And finally, there is the popo, a voyaging canoe built with specifications that enabled it to sail long distances across dangerous seas. A few decades ago, several master palu from the outer islands of Yap and Chuuk helped to usher in a period of revived interest in traditional navigation throughout the Pacific. This revitalization movement can be traced to a handful of master palu, such as Hipur and Ikuliman from Puluwat and Chuuk, and Ripunglap and Ripunglug from Sadawal and Yap, who in the late 1960s and early 1970s began to once again open ancient sea routes used by their ancestors before them. And then famously, the well-known navigator Mau Piulug from Sadawal and Yap continued the Renaissance by completing numerous voyages throughout Micronesia and even helping to reteach the ancient art of oceanic wayfinding to Hawaiians and other Polynesian cultures that had lost the traditional knowledge. Ali Haliolur from Lematrek in Yap is one of the few master navigators still practicing and teaching the ancient art of wayfinding. He has been on numerous journeys across open ocean on various outrigger canoes, such as the famous Simeon Hokulea. He is also the latest in a long line of Palu. He is the son of a famous Pululap, a grandmaster navigator from Sadawal and Lematrek, the late Jesus Yuripi, who himself embarked on countless voyages throughout Micronesia. It is now up to Ali and a very small group of remaining master navigators, including Euripi's last remaining brother Rapwi, to continue to initiate future generations of worthy navigators who are willing to undergo the intense training needed to captain sailing canoes across the dangerous open ocean without the use of modern instruments. Knowledge holders such as Ali recognize that newer generations are not naturally drawn to learn this ancient wisdom for various reasons. As such, he and others are developing innovative new ways to teach and transmit the less culturally sensitive elements of this valuable knowledge. Ali, for example, has been designing more conventional teaching methods to teach traditional navigation on the main islands of Yap. This has even led to 2 recent Po ceremonies to initiate new navigators. One such ceremony is seen here. Ali has also been working with the local community colleges in the FSM to create courses on the basics of traditional navigation, and has even shared his knowledge publicly online with the nonprofit organization Pacifica Renaissance. And one of Ali's recent apprentices, Larry Ragatai, has also been teaching traditional navigation skills to students in Guam. Along with his wife, Regina, Larry manages WAGE, a nonprofit organization supporting navigation, canoe building, and many other cultural heritage activities from Yap's outer islands. While various types of canoes continue to be built on the more remote islands throughout the FSM, until just recently, it was only the popo that could still be found on the main islands of Yap. In 2013, however, Chief Thargnon resurrected the chugpin by using historical pictures to complement the little knowledge still heard in the oral histories about their design. It was the first time in decades that a chugpin sailed the waters of Yap, and Chief Thargnon hopes to one day also revive the thowab and the gawal as well, with the help of the Yapese Traditional Navigation Society. As he continues to demonstrate and teach to a small group of apprentices, Chief Thargnon and the Yapese Traditional Navigation Society have taken the torch to carry forward a tradition of canoe building that was almost lost completely on the main islands of Yap, but is now seeing a resurgence through efforts such as the annual Yapese Canoe Festival. What all these knowledge holders have in common is the recognition of the dangers of these traditions being lost forever, and an understanding of the need to find new ways to teach their wisdom to newer generations. Larry Ragatal often uses a navigational metaphor to help others understand the importance and necessity in continuing to teach and learn the traditional knowledge from the islands. He points out that cultural heritage preservation is vital to a society's development, and this awareness can be cultivated by using an analogy to sailing under the stars. As Larry notes, quote, before losing sight of the land of origin, the navigator must look back to know which star it will disappear under, so he can determine the course for the land of destination. It is a critical celestial navigation reference. And finally, as he further makes clear when speaking about how critical cultural preservation is, he says, quote, in order for us to move forward, we must know from where we came. Thus, our culture, which is really our identity, is key for us to move forward, unquote. Keeping an eye on their past, today's Yappies navigators and canoe builders are helping to steer a course to a better tomorrow.
Estas dos manifestaciones culturales y que claramente nos muestran estos temas que de hecho pues son centrales a nuestro festival. El video nos muestra entonces estos complejos sistemas de posicionamiento en el mar y de construcción de embarcaciones que dependen de un detallado conocimiento sobre la naturaleza que permite o que le permitió a los habitantes de estas islas, bueno, habitar en ellas, así como moverse por estos espacios. De hecho, pues nos muestran en este video estos complejos, cómo es el sistema de complejo que las personas pueden localizarse, ¿cierto? Digamos, es en el medio del mar con referencia a las diferentes islas, ¿cierto? Pero también leyendo diferentes cosas que hay en el entorno y que por supuesto requiere de un proceso, digamos, de memoria supremamente importante, ¿cierto? De memoria tanto de las personas que aprenden como una memoria, digamos, colectiva, que es en donde se encuentra este conocimiento. Nos muestran además entonces los diversos tipos de canoa con diferentes usos que nuevamente pues se vinculan a este conocimiento tan detallado del entorno y finalmente nos hablan en la parte final sobre cómo pues todo este conocimiento se ha ido perdiendo, ¿cierto? Y cómo más o menos hacia los años 60 se empieza un proceso de revitalización, un movimiento de revitalización liderado por navegantes ancianos, ¿cierto? Por sabedores de esto que empiezan a preocuparse porque se está perdiendo, obviamente con la llegada de los motores fuera de borda, de los sistemas de posicionamiento geográfico, GPS, que de alguna manera pues empiezan a desplazar a estas tradiciones y seguramente pues eso es algo que también conocemos en el contexto nuestro. y sin embargo, pues este movimiento lo que logra es precisamente que haya un nuevo impulso por construir embarcaciones, por hacer viajes, ¿cierto? Y por supuesto por transmitirle a las nuevas generaciones todo esto, lo cual es un reto, por supuesto, y aquí también lo sabemos, porque obviamente no son los mismos tiempos, son otros momentos, pero por supuesto ahí es donde aparecen estas formas innovadoras para revitalizar estas manifestaciones, ¿cierto? A través de cursos, a través de nuevas formas de enseñar, a través de vinculaciones con las universidades, que de alguna manera pues es lo que ha logrado que hoy en día haya pues un reconocimiento de su importancia y que pues sigan vivas en medio digamos, de todo. Y creo que ahí es muy importante como el cierre que hace una referencia a a esta, a esta cuota, ¿cierto? Este testimonio de uno de los sabedores que dice, para saber a dónde ir, debemos saber de dónde venimos, ¿cierto? Y de alguna manera, pues hace referencia tanto al conocimiento, ¿cierto? Obviamente a estos sistemas, de cómo funcionan estos sistemas de localización, pero por supuesto, digamos, a la importancia que tiene la identidad cultural en el marco, digamos, pues de un mundo globalizado. Ashley.
Yes. Okay. So now we'll talk about the significance of the element, both in terms of demonstrating it, but also in the quality of it. So we'll talk about the actual significance of it. Communities in the FSM, in particular, communities of the outer islands of Yap State, continue this age-old indigenous tradition of building long-distance ocean voyaging sailing canoes from local materials, and of the tradition ocean navigation, also wayfinding, without maps or instruments that we might think of today. And as such, these communities preserve their local versions of the technical and intellectual traditions, which are the last vestiges of indigenous reasoning. Indigenous traditions involving the craft, sustainable materials, design, mathematics of navigational reasoning. These tradition and technologies made possible the settlement of the thousands of islands across the entire vast Pacific Ocean, and these traditions are now lost in most Pacific nations. It is of note that the much celebrated Polynesian seafaring renaissance and the history-changing voyages of the Hokulea, as mentioned in the video, would not have occurred without the involvement of a Micronesian master navigator, Mau Pialu, who I referenced at the beginning as Papa Mau. And he taught the Hawaiians navigation skills that were long lost in their own culture. And in addition to the celestial navigation, the traditional wayfinders use a huge variety of environmental cues, including atmospheric phenomena, the gathering of clouds over islands beyond the horizon, the subtle perturbations of swells caused by the islands beyond the horizon, and the behavior of the long-distance flying but land-based seabirds, and the occurrence of other air and water species. Anna, do you want to translate that part? I have another section to talk about.
Aquí nos estaba complementando Ashley precisamente sobre la riqueza de este conocimiento y el hecho de que en realidad pues en la mayor parte del Pacífico estos conocimientos que fueron los que permitieron que los isleños, isleñas de las diferentes islas de la región pues colonizaran miles de islas, ¿cierto? Puedan asentarse en miles de islas en la región hace cientos y miles de años, ¿cierto? Muchísimo antes de la colonización europea. Pues estos conocimientos pues se han perdido en la mayor parte de la región. Sin embargo, pues existen precisamente esos procesos de recuperación que, entre otras cosas, también cabe señalar que cuando hablamos de estos sistemas de posicionamiento en donde el cielo, digamos, es fundamental, pues hay que añadir que en realidad pues es un conocimiento profundo de la naturaleza, ¿cierto? Porque hay un montón de variables en el entorno, fenómenos atmosféricos, comportamiento de los animales, comportamiento de las aves y también de los animales marinos, otros aspectos que hay en el entorno que permiten que las personas se localicen sin la ayuda de mapas y sin la ayuda de otro tipo de instrumentos que se han utilizado en otros contextos culturales distintos.
Okay. And the second part of the significance has to do with the making of the canoe, and it should be understood as so the making of a substantial canoe is a project which involves the entire community, some directly in carving, making coconut fiber cordage, sail making, and related arts, and some less directly in growing gardens to feed the workers. The process begins with selection and felling of the chosen tree, even with the planting and stewardship of the forest. Canoe carving involves a detailed and precise proportional measurement system, a true indigenous mathematical tradition, which is accurate and verifiable. The carving is done almost exclusively with the indigenous adze in varying sizes, which is also a highly sophisticated tool capable of great precision when wielded with skill. The indigenous Micronesian sailing canoes have a unique form and utilize dynamics quite unlike Western craft. The asymmetrical outrigger design affords high-speed sailing. Western explorers arriving in the Pacific from the 16th century on had never seen the craft, which sailed so fast, up to 5 times the maximum speed of Western craft. The outrigger design allows access to very shallow water. Changing directions involves shunting as opposed to Western tacking. Shunting involves moving the sail rig to the other end and the boat in reversing direction. These skills are learned from an early age, children practicing by making and racing model canoes. Go ahead, Ana.
En relación entonces con la construcción de canoas, ella nos cuenta cómo se trata de una tradición de gran importancia que tiene una relevancia social en donde mucha gente, muchos actores diferentes confluyen, donde la familia juega un papel fundamental y en donde además están incluidos o son necesarios una gran cantidad de conocimientos, incluyendo matemáticas, digamos, propias, ¿cierto? Así como herramientas que fueron diseñadas hace muchísimo tiempo para estos fines. Nos dice que cuando llegaron los europeos, cuando empezaron los procesos de colonización de la región, pues en realidad se encontraron con formas de embarcaciones completamente diferentes de las que había en el contexto occidental, que entre otras cosas permitían, digamos, hacer un uso diferente de las embarcaciones y además embarcaciones que eran muchísimo más veloces que las que conocían los europeos. Okay, Ashley.
Gracias. Okay, and so this other part of significance, in order to demonstrate the significance described in the last two sections, it requires writing skills to do this. The oral and the reading aspects are required as well, because you need to be able to access the documents that have been written already. And it also requires good communication skills with those who are knowledgeable about the element. And so therefore, to demonstrate the significance of the element, there's an oral, a reading, and a writing aspect to it. The next part of this presentation, I'll talk about the nomination process. And it's important to talk about this because the process, it's one thing to prepare an application, but you really have to have a member state to submit it. And so that member state is usually someone who represents the country. And in the case, our office, the FSM National Archives of Cultural and Historic Preservation, is that office that would submit the nomination that's prepared by, depending on the site or depending on the element. And so in our case, it was countrywide, and therefore there were a number of people who prepared this nomination. After it's submitted, it is then reviewed by UNESCO, and then there is follow-up from the World Heritage Committee, if any, and then there's a meeting typically in December, and this meeting is based on a recommendation from the World Heritage Committee, and this recommendation could be to add it to the list or to not add it to the list. Go ahead, Ana.
Bueno, nos está contando entonces sobre, bueno, después de tener como esta idea que ya nos hacemos de estas tradiciones, que entre otras cosas es muy bonito porque hay muchas cosas en común a pesar de las diferencias culturales, de que se tratan además de tradiciones supremamente antiguas, mucho más que las que tenemos en el territorio nuestro, pues de todas maneras hay muchísimas cosas en común. Ella nos está contando entonces cómo es ese proceso de nominación, bueno, ante la UNESCO y lo que, digamos, todo lo que requiere en el sentido de que debe ser un gobierno, ¿cierto?, el que hace la postulación y después pues sigue un proceso en el cual entran diferentes actores que toman pues la decisión si se reconoce como una manifestación que se incluye en las listas representativas de patrimonio cultural de la humanidad o si no es aceptada.
All right. Okay, so now that the nomination process has concluded, what does this mean for Micronesia if the element is added to the list? And in our case, the element was added to the list in December of 2021, and this became because it was put on the UNESCO website, it was advertised by the meeting to discuss this element. It really raised international awareness about this element. Newsweek contacted us. Ana from Procelan contacted us. And so we have just experienced a lot more interest in the subject, as well as a lot more local interest. During the pandemic, canoe making became a little bit more prominent. In part, this may have been the result of recognizing the challenges in the supply chains, to recognizing the significance of the canoe culturally. But in fairness, prior to the pandemic, canoe making was practiced in Koshrai on the Eastern Carolina Islands because there were canoe races. And these canoes are not only used in races, but they're also used in fishing in the mangroves and inside the reef. And so they're very much still utilized in subsistence way of life. And so this ICH nomination really built up the element. It strengthened it in terms of local interest across the FSM. There's a lot more local awareness about the element, and especially engagement. And as I mentioned, the international awareness. The link here is a link to the element if you want to know more about the nomination application, information in there. And there was also a lot more, when I say local interest, the local high school students wanted to create a navigation club, and we were very fortunate to have a few boats to arrive in Koshrai and talk to the kids about navigation and actually emphasize the importance of knowing traditional navigation, because it was traditional navigation that helped to inform the GPS navigation that they utilized. And they explained that even when GPS fails, that there's still some traditional knowledge about navigation that comes in handy when technology fails them. Go ahead, Ana.
Bueno, y entonces nos cuenta precisamente sobre lo que ha significado esta nominación a partir de que es muy reciente, ¿cierto? Es desde diciembre del 2021 cuando se reconoce como Patrimonio Cultural de la Humanidad, y eso hace que localmente haya pues mucha mayor conciencia, digamos, de la importancia de estas manifestaciones, un mayor compromiso por parte de algunos de los actores relacionados y igualmente, digamos, que haya desde afuera, digamos, haya a nivel internacional, pues haya un interés mayor también por esta cuestión. De hecho, bueno, nos cuenta, I didn't understood good, like what happened in the pandemic is like more people were building. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they were building more canoes and they were auctioning them off during a festival, actually, a Fafa festival. And
Okay. Okay.
yeah, so they were used for fishing.
Okay. Sí, nos está contando que incluso, bueno, antes de la nominación, de que la nominación fuera reconocida durante la pandemia, al parecer hubo como como que construir canoas se volvió bastante importante. Claro, I imagine it's because fishing is like, well, became very important, you know, because there was like a way to survive. Precisamente porque se volvió muy importante la pesca, mucho más importante obviamente ante el cierre, digamos, de muchas otras actividades económicas, y eso de alguna manera disparó la construcción de canoas en Micronesia. Igualmente, pues también nos cuenta algunos otros ejemplos de cómo digamos, ha venido ganando importancia la manifestación. Nos habla de estas carreras de canoas. We have races here too in San Andrés, Ashley. Y también nos habla de un grupo de chicos que pues empiezan a mostrarse interesados por aprender sobre la navegación tradicional, sobre estos conocimientos que de alguna manera pues además son complementarios a saber manejar un GPS o cualquiera de estos implementos pues modernos, ¿cierto? Que pues de alguna manera pues pueden igual fallar, ¿cierto? Mientras que muchos de estos conocimientos pues en realidad no dependen del conocimiento de la persona y no de un aparato. Okay.
Okay, so the next slide, we're actually going to play a video. It's just more about the nomination and how it's opened up opportunities for some financial assistance to continue to safeguard the element. We can add to the element as more data become available. So it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes a nomination can frighten communities or frighten nations in that it may not be seen as complete or all the knowledge isn't there. And the beauty of it is that you can always add to it. And then the last benefit that I'll say here is that it strengthened community cohesion and involvement. And so this video was created by our high school students in Koshrai who created a navigation club as part of their vocational period in high school. So they can create a club for anything, and they chose to do navigation. And as part of their club time, they made a video to demonstrate what they learned from their elders. They actually involved, they involved the elders. The elders came to our office, and we set it up. We helped them to set it up, and they listened to elders speak about navigation, and the children listened. And at the end, they asked follow-up questions. And that's how they built this video, in addition to some archival type work. They read documents, they asked questions, and that sort of line of inquiry. And so this video is a culmination of that. I will add a kind of funny note to the creation of the navigation club. At first, there were we asked, to limit it to about 18 because that's what we could manage in our office. And before we knew it, students were quitting their other vocational clubs to come join Navigation Club. And so we actually ended up making the Navigation Club a little bit bigger so that more students could be involved in it. They wanted to know so much about Koshraian navigational practices. And so it was really a beautiful thing to see our kids and our elders come together again and again and again. And that's kind of the point of historic preservation, is that it's active and that it's involved, and and it's desired. So anyway, this is a video of that. I will leave it to you to play.
Ok, antes de pasar al video, que es el segundo video que tenemos para compartirles, cabe añadir también, digamos que la nominación pues ha abierto oportunidades para lograr apoyo financiero para generar procesos que contribuyan a la salvaguarda de estas manifestaciones. Además de que de manera pues importante ha contribuido a fortalecer, digamos, la cohesión y la participación de la comunidad en estas manifestaciones. Y el video que vamos a ver ahorita tiene que ver con precisamente estos jóvenes que mencioné también antes, que precisamente organizaron como parte de lo que tienen que hacer como al finalizar el colegio, organizaron este club de navegación en donde básicamente pues hicieron todo un proceso de investigación, cierto, de aprendizaje de diferentes fuentes, incluyendo por supuesto a los sabedores de estas manifestaciones con quienes estuvieron interactuando y aprendiendo. Y pues finalmente, digamos, sale este video que vamos a ver a continuación. Un dato curioso que nos cuenta Ashley es que ellos tenían como un cupo limitado para este club de jóvenes, que era de 18 personas, y cuando vieron, pues había un montón de chicos saliéndose de otros clubes para meterse en este de navegación, y pues realmente pues eso fue muy gratificante por el interés de los jóvenes en esta actividad. Entonces ahora vamos a ver el video.
Natural beauty, yeah. No, I've never been someone shy until I seen your eyes. Still I had to try, yeah. Oh yes, let me get my words right and then approach you. Woman, I'll treat you like a man is supposed to.
It was believed that the first people to discover our island were navigators. Imagine how skillful our ancestors navigated around our waters without the use or existence of modern technologies we use today. As they went out deep into the ocean, they managed to successfully return home with very little difficulty. This intrinsic knowledge of traditional navigation skills were passed on from one generation to the next until new technologies or modern tools were introduced. Our elders, well, most likely the fishermen, have used basic navigational skills and ideas to help them in finding their location while lost in the sea.
With me, I navigate using the sky spin. Kada figures magungan maging yanayin yung fat, malim, star constellations, kaya pewon masok sa kinin yung example ke star constellations ay gungan maging Big Dipper. Kung biniye Big Dipper, ito siya na ma-calumet kaya sa North Star, kaya kailangan assume that which way is north.
Today, we still use their ideas throughout our journeys in the ocean. Nowadays, people have also used GPS, compass, maps, and electronics instead to make lives easier for navigating.
Kung nagawa kong dinala na ako rin may shoot kung dinaro. Oro rin mga ilay shoot na sunwe, yok ka nagi, tatar, ime, pagpagsak, mga namit ko sa'yo mo ta oro. Hefin li natin mo, or kung tulmul, patib lagi, natin na. Kung ikatungin pa, maspang, masawa, masawan, masawan, lat-lat, masawan. Siya po nga po sa kanparlop, siya Norway, tak po may loyalty, kawala siya, kawala luo, sopa sapnok, sopa kos ng kasap, sonak, son bararti, tutuit, ninginiganga, kung doy mo.
So royal, and I want her in my life. I never knew anyone so divine. Oh, the way she moves to her own beat, she has the qualities of a queen, so supreme. natural beauty. No need no makeup to be a cutie. She's a queen, so supreme, yeah. And when they ask what a good woman's made of, she's not afraid and ashamed of who she is. She's royal, yeah, so royal. And I want her in my life. I never knew anyone so one of a kind. No, no, the way she moves to her own beat. She has the qualities of a queen. My Nubian queen. Ooh, hey, we got it.
¿Ya? Bueno, entonces aquí teníamos este video hecho por los jóvenes. It was made by the youth, wasn't it? It was made by
Yes, they had complete creative freedom for making that video, and so that was made by them. Yeah, their own initiative.
Bueno, entonces teníamos este video que fue realizado por los mismos chicos y chicas que participaron en este espacio. Y bueno, creo que no necesita traducción porque muestra precisamente esta interacción y este proceso de los mismos chicos. So Ashley, I think you're finishing, so just well, it's your turn now.
All right, I will conclude. The video that just played, it was completely on the children to create. That was their creative freedom and their creative result. And I want to point out that much of the footage was them exploring the water, going around the island, to really get a sense of what it means to navigate around the island. There's this very high mountain on the island. It's called Pino Cinco, and you can see it from all parts of the island, so you have a good idea of which part of the island you're on based on the side of the mountain that you can see. And even though it's the tallest, it looks different from every angle. And there's this range of mountains that is often referred to as the Sleeping Lady, or Makantoe. It's now a conservation area. And so the video footage, some of it's ethnographic and some of it is experiential, in that the children, some of them were jumping in deep water for the first time, and this was very different for them, to see the bottom, and it's very, very far. It's a lot like maybe jumping off of a cliff sometimes. And so we wanted the children to experience outside of the reef as much as we wanted them to understand navigation, both traditional and modern instruments. And so they had a very holistic exposure, not just from our office, but their curiosity was holistic. They wanted to know everything possible about navigation, past and present. And we were very fortunate at that time to have several different people come from outside who normally don't live there, such as the people from Australia, and then the MIT researchers. One of the activities asked the students to draw their island, and the picture that you saw with the young girl who had drawn the island, it was very detailed. It was impressive. I'm not sure I could have done that even with my own state in the United States. And so I'm just very impressed with how well they know the details of their island. So the children were a large part of really feeling like this nomination had done its part and will continue to do its part. It's one thing to know all of this stuff. It's another to put it in an application and say, hey, look at this very significant element, and for other people to learn about it and to come to know it. And so the opportunity to share with everyone today about this process is an intimate one and an intellectual one as well. So this nomination was very much possible because of the desire and commitment from our communities in the FSM, our NGOs. We had several grantors who helped to round out the nomination with a couple of projects. And then we have a lot of interested colleagues and scholars who maybe don't reside full-time in FSM, but their passion and love for the element certainly comes through. And then a special thanks to our navigators, our Traditional Navigation Society and YAP, Pacifico Renaissance, who helped to make the video, and our historic preservation offices for their support and our leadership. And of course, our host for this festival, fostering cross-cultural communication, sharing about navigation and fishing and traditional wayfinding, canoe making, all of that. And so it's just a very unique place that we get to be to talk about this and to share it with each other. So muchísimas gracias. And I'm done. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ashley, very much for your presentation. I think it's very, very interesting. And ya estamos cerrando la presentación de Ashley, pero les recuerdo que tenemos un espacio para preguntas. Ella pues terminaba contándonos, bueno, sobre esta experiencia de los jóvenes que de alguna manera buscó ser una experiencia holística, ¿cierto? Que ellos tuvieran un acercamiento a la navegación desde muchas perspectivas, ¿cierto? Y también no solo a la navegación, sino al mar, ¿cierto? Que pues es al final de cuentas un espacio de vida también para estas comunidades, como también lo es para nosotros aquí en San Andrés y Providencia, desde donde estamos transmitiendo. Y para cerrar, pues ella agradece, digamos, nos cuenta que esta nominación pues fue posible precisamente por la participación de diferentes actores, por supuesto de las comunidades, de diferentes ONGs nacionales e internacionales, del gobierno, por supuesto, de las personas que saben, de los sabedores y las sabedoras de que todavía, digamos, portan esta manifestación. Y pues termina pues agradeciendo también por el espacio, que por supuesto para mí también es un gusto poder haber escuchado sobre esto y tener la posibilidad de compartir también de este lado del mundo. Creo que no sabemos mucho sobre Oceanía, es tan lejos de nosotros que realmente estamos completamente desconectados, pero creo que conocer sobre esto, y no solamente también sobre las manifestaciones, pero también sobre estos procesos de salvaguarda, pues enriquece, digamos, lo que podemos pensar sobre las cosas que se pueden hacer de este lado del mundo. Entonces, veo que hay una pregunta en el chat. Cualquiera que tenga alguna pregunta puede escribirla en el chat y yo con mucho gusto se la hago a Ashley. Pero entonces voy a empezar. I'm going to do two questions for you, Ashley. First is okay. I would like to ask you if you could like give us like a little briefing of like how big is Micronesia, how much islands there are, how much people is there, and like if these traditions are all over or like if they are concentrated in some places. That would be the first one. And then I have a question here on the chat that is saying, in all this process, what are the findings regarding to the importance of the will of the community to share their ancestral knowledge?
Okay. So the first question, I'll respond that there is about 1 million square miles of water. This is including the exclusive economic zone. The land area is a little over 200 square miles. And then, if I'm remembering that correctly, there are about 600 islands, and the population is around 100,000. And the high islands, most of them have outer islands, with the exception of Koshai. There are atolls to the east of Yap, and of course, so to the west of Chuuk, and then there are some in between Chuuk and Pohnpei, and then some between Pohnpei and Koshai. And then your second question, sorry, can you repeat that one again?
Yeah, well, the question is related to like the process with the community. Like, what do you consider is important in relate, or what do you learn from the importance of the community to agree to share their local or their ancestral knowledge?
For our office, it's important for them to understand what that means. So if they're willing to share, we want them to understand the extent to which it can be shared. And so if they share with us for the purposes of the nomination, it's important for us to make sure that they understand that this can go beyond the boundaries of their communities, beyond the boundaries of my ears or my colleagues' ears, that it can become international, and that it becomes a bit more like a commodity, in that it can be consumed, in that it can be learned. And so that we just want our communities to be aware of that aspect to a nomination. So I think that's the first part of it, is just making sure that we understand each other and where this is going to go. In no way would our office propose that an element be nominated without community support. I mean, everything from the practitioners to the relatives of the practitioners, it's a community-wide effort, really, for navigation and for canoe making, as well as a nomination. So everyone is involved, and everyone should be consulted in some way or another. I will add that it's we rely on our communities to have some of those conversations with their communities locally in their local language. And so while we seek to include the communities, we do there's an element of agency, right? It has to come from the communities first. And so that's where this came from and went all the way up to our office. So we facilitated a community desire. Does that?
Yeah, I just have a question. Is there only one language, or is several?
There are several. So there are some major languages like Pohnpeian, Chuukese, Yapese, Koshayan, Ulithian, Woliayan. And then technically there are about 18 different languages, because each island has a little bit different way of speaking, communicating. Even if it is mutually intelligible, from a linguistic perspective, there are much more than the high island dominant languages. And English is widely spoken in the FSM, simply because of the diversity of language. And so this acts as the language that everyone can speak. It's sort of, I'm not sure I would say neutral, but it's neutral in the sense that it's not picking one of the languages in the country that's indigenous. It's using a language that wasn't there originally. So yeah, lots of languages.
Okay,
Lots
thank
of
you.
languages.
Le estaba preguntando a Ashley, bueno, un poco más sobre Micronesia, sobre cómo son las islas, cómo es el archipiélago, cuánta gente hay, y básicamente dice que son aproximadamente 1 millón de millas cuadradas de maritorio, ¿cierto? En realidad de territorio, pero en realidad de maritorio, porque es más mar que tierra. Aproximadamente 600 islas, ¿cierto? La mayor parte de ellos son atolones, ¿cierto? Son arrecifes de coral. So it has to be very beautiful, isn't it? Y aproximadamente 100,000 habitantes. Con respecto a la segunda pregunta que tenía que ver, que viene del público, que tiene que ver como sobre lo que aprendieron sobre la importancia de contar como con la voluntad de la comunidad para compartir su conocimiento tradicional o ancestral. Pues ella menciona que esto fue, digamos, un proceso que de alguna manera surgió desde la misma comunidad, ¿cierto? Desde personas de la comunidad que estaban interesadas en contribuir o en buscar herramientas para salvaguardar estos conocimientos. Y por supuesto que para ellos, que digamos que también fue muy importante que la gente supiera, digamos que llevar adelante un proceso de estos, pues tiene pros y contras, ¿cierto? Que por supuesto, digamos, puede haber transformaciones cuando un conocimiento o una manifestación cultural se vuelve, digamos, mucho más conocida hacia el exterior, ¿cierto? Pues digamos, incluso pues en este mundo se puede volver tipo un commodity, ¿cierto? Algo que entra, puede terminar entrando en el mercado y de alguna manera pues sí fue muy importante que la gente supiera eso, ¿cierto? Para que pudiera tomar esa decisión de si realmente quería pues llevar adelante el proceso. Y pues de alguna manera sí fue clave para el proceso que hubiera, digamos, un acuerdo entre la comunidad, entre las comunidades, ¿cierto? Y pues para eso, digamos, pues parte del proceso realmente también es precisamente eso, ¿cierto? Llegar a acuerdos con la gente. Yo le preguntaba precisamente aquí sobre el tema de los idiomas y pues dice que hay una gran diversidad lingüística, pero pues bueno, hay algunas lenguas en común, ¿cierto? Que de alguna manera también permiten articularse. I would like to ask you, Ashley, in this process, however, like, did you find like at some points like people or communities that didn't agree to go ahead on the process? Like, how did you deal with that? And then there is another question here on the chat that's saying how these communities deal with ideas like total exposition of their knowledge as losing their ethnic ground and identity, how to ensure that they feel safe to share.
The first question is that we did not experience any outright resistance to going forward with this. If there was a delay, then we understood that it needed to be discussed more in the communities. And so I would say that it took us a couple of years to really put it together, to reach the appropriate people, to make sure that everyone had the information that they needed, either what we thought they needed or what they thought they needed, to make an informed decision. And so outright resistance, no, but I think that along the way there were times where things needed to be discussed further. And so we accommodated that. We just didn't submit the application until everyone was happy with it. And then the second question, can you tell me that one again, please? I'm sorry.
It's like more or less it's like how the communities deal with these ideas, like for example, like that their culture can be commodified, you know, like how did you or like how they react to these, like what was their position, and also like, well, what did you, or like which agreements you get in relation to this, like for they feel safe to go ahead on the process.
Okay. So I think in some instances it's really hard to say how any one person really feels about the commodification of the practice. I will say that it is possible, although at the discretion of the community, that you can pay to ride on a canoe in the lagoon in Yap, but it's not something that you can just go and pick off of a menu. It has to really be that you're there at the right time. You have to have really good conditions in order to, even for the possibility, right? You got to have good winds, and so it's commodification in the sense that it can be paid for, but it's still at the mercy of the natural elements and the human elements, because this is a way of life. This isn't for entertainment. And so I think that in sharing that, it's, visitors are reminded that it's a way of life rather than a form of entertainment. So there's a lot of education that goes into that when it is shared. And so On an individual basis, I'm not 100% sure how anyone particularly feels about the commodification. But when I say commodification, I just mean that people become very interested in and so they consume that knowledge, right? And so that's what I mean by the commodification of it.
Okay. But I have a question. Like, well, I imagine like Micronesia is like a touristical place. So, are these traditions like involved with tourism? Like, is people like relating it to tourism? Like, tourists they can come and see these or have a relation with this, or is like something that is like very local, owned by the communities that not for tourism?
It's very locally owned. It's just sometimes available for tourism. Like you really just have to be in the right place at the right time and know people. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's publicly available. Like the hotels don't really advertise it, to my knowledge. So it's very much a local practice, rather than being available for tourism. And I mean, tourism in FSM is small anyway. The frequency it's low. Yap and Chuk probably experience the majority of the tourism, and then Pohnpei, and then Koshrai. And getting to the outer islands, it's a challenge anyway. And so when visitors are on a particular schedule, it's a bit of a risk for them to go to an outer island, because they don't know when they're going to come back exactly. They know roughly, but you're dependent on one plane or a boat. And so going to Micronesia is inherently an adventure, one that requires time and patience and understanding. And, it's not for everyone. So when people travel and expect to keep a schedule, sometimes people are just going to miss out, just because they have schedules to keep, and that's respectable, and respected very much. And so yeah, I mean, it's really if you're in the right place at the right time to be able to take a ride on a canoe.
Okay. Well, I'm going to translate, but before I translate, I want to ask you like a question and then two questions, and then we're going to finish this space. And it's like,
Okay.
okay, but do you think like, for example, now that you have like more, like it's more visible, if you think it might turn into like a touristical thing? And then just hold on, and then the last question would be, is if concerning to this mathematical knowledge that you mentioned, if there has been compared with modern Western knowledge of geolocalization, and like if there are studies like comparing it. And before you answer, then I'm going back to what you said. Y pues básicamente la última pregunta que estaba relacionada con el tema de, bueno, cómo lidiar con la posibilidad, digamos, de que estas prácticas se mercantilicen, ¿cierto? Pues ella dice que en realidad siguen siendo muy propias, muy locales, no están vinculadas al turismo. De hecho, porque se practican sobre todo en lugares muy aislados, ¿cierto? En islas que están muy lejos, entonces realmente son lugares donde llegan muy poquito turismo. Pues imaginémonos que es un archipiélago tan grande. Entonces, pues en realidad en estos momentos no hay realmente como un proceso de mercantilización, digamos, de estas prácticas. Pues sin embargo, pues y hacia allá va como una de las preguntas que yo hago, y es, bueno, ¿qué pasa? ¿Qué podría pasar ahora que se vuelvan más visibles con el tema de este reconocimiento? Y ya con esto vamos cerrando este espacio. Y la última pregunta que le hice a Ashley, y pues lo que va a responder ahora para terminar, es sobre el tema de las matemáticas, del conocimiento matemático propio, y si existen, digamos, si se han hecho procesos, digamos, de compararlo con el conocimiento matemático occidental, y bueno, también el tema de la geolocalización, digamos, tradicional y la occidental. It's your terms, Ashley.
Okay. So the element became nominated in the middle of the pandemic, so we haven't really seen much in the way of increased tourism, most likely because of that. I think it's really up to the communities if they're up for doing this, because it means that people will come to their village, which is, I would say, a little unusual unless you have an invitation if you're in Yap. And so yeah, I think it's still going to be a fairly special practice in the sense that it will be a part of life rather than a tourist option. And again, I think it'll just be right place, right time, at least initially. And then the second part to your question, I'm sorry.
It's
Can you
about
repeat that?
mathematics, like like if there are studies about like comparing like the local like traditional mathematics and like Western mathematics.
Oh, okay. I think first of all, it's my understanding that that this has been compared to, like, it's calculable, like the way that it's being done is calculable. And but after that, I think that that's more of a question for our navigators, because they would have been the ones asked about this. And then what there was another part to your question.
No, it was the same question, but in relation like to if there are comparisons between like the local like geolocalization and like the Western one.
Oh, okay. Honestly, that's a really good question. I really don't know, because to talk about the Carolinian wayfinding in comparison to Western, I mean, we'd have to talk about like which period of time's being compared, you know? And so if we're talking about Carolinian wayfinding, 100 years ago, and Western ways 100 years ago, that might be a comparison that could be talked about. But then compared to today, that part I'm not sure which one's been compared. I know that I know that they're trying to prove it, or it's been compared. I'm just not sure which comparison that they've made. So I'm not really the best person to answer that question, as much as our navigators would be to answer that question, especially Ali, since he teaches it.
Ok, thank you, Ashley. Entonces, para cerrar estas últimas intervención de Ashley, bueno, sobre el tema del turismo, pues la verdad es que apenas, digamos, se están recuperando también de la pandemia, entonces también, y la denominación o la declaración es muy reciente, entonces pues también en estos momentos no es posible saber, bueno, qué va a pasar con el tema también del turismo. Y por otra parte, con respecto a la pregunta sobre las matemáticas, pues bueno, ella dice que sí se han hecho, digamos que sí ha habido, digamos, esos ejercicios, pero que realmente pues ella no sabe tanto sobre el tema, pero además porque cree que es una pregunta que debería ser respondida realmente por las personas que portan el conocimiento sobre este tema. Y bueno, creo que con esto ya nos vamos despidiendo. Les comentamos que tenemos una actividad a las 7 de la noche, tenemos otro espacio donde vamos a hablar sobre experiencias pedagógicas relacionadas con el mar, el agua, la pesca, la navegación, donde tenemos 3 invitados. Es un espacio en español donde vamos a estar hablando de estas iniciativas. Y bueno, seguimos con programación mañana y el martes y de nuestra programación virtual, y programación presencial en San Andrés hasta el miércoles, y en Providencia jueves, viernes y sábado. Entonces, well, thank you very much, Ashley, for being here with us. It's really, really interesting to learn about what you've been doing in Micronesia, to learn about all these initiatives, these processes. As I said before, like we are very far and culturally distant, but there are many things in common, like in these struggles, like to keep up with cultural identity, and like, well, also what it means to live on islands. So I think like I personally have learned a lot from your presentation. So please say hello to the navigators when you have the chance. We really miss them here today, but it was very good to hear you. And thank you very much.
Absolutely. I will extend that to them. I miss them too, because they're definitely more appropriate to be talking about this. But we're very happy to have been able to share about our nomination and the importance of safeguarding. And we're looking forward to the rest of the festival and hearing more about your island and other presenters about their island. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, thank you. Muchas gracias para todos y para todas. Buenas noches y sigan con nuestra programación en estos 3 días virtuales. Pueden encontrar más información en nuestra página web, en Facebook, en YouTube. Y bueno, mis disculpas por los problemas técnicos. Era la primera actividad del día de hoy. Esperemos que las próximas sean más tranquilas. Muchas gracias and good night to everybody. Thank you, thank you. Chao, buenas noches.
Ciao. Good night.